Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We're just going to give everybody a minute here to join the call, and then we'll get started. And throughout the presentation, if anybody has comments or questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll bring them up when it's relevant to do so. Thank you for your participation as well. We look forward to hearing from you all. And for everybody that's joined, we're just giving people a minute or two here to join us and log on, and then we'll get started. Hi, Andy. Okay, that's probably enough time. We've got a bunch of people on the call here. So thank you everybody for signing on and spending your lunch with us. My name is Quinn Heffron. I'm an associate here at Alberta Council. I focus on supporting our energy clients here at the firm. So it's a great privilege for me to moderate our discussion and webinar today, and bring you some fantastic guests that are going to have a great presentation for you all this afternoon. So, in addition to myself, I'll be moderating today's discussion. We have Clay Dreyer from Alberta Council. He specializes in fund development, supports our clients in identifying, securing, and submitting grants and incentives on behalf of clients to advance their various projects. He has a strong understanding of funding programs and application processes. Clay also helps design strategies that maximize financial opportunities for long-term project success here at Alberta Council. Secondly, Moin Yaya, um, again here at Alberta Council. He has a strong background in Alberta's energy sector. Before joining Alberta Council, was a commissioner at the Alberta Utilities Commission, where he has obviously gained valuable experience in electricity market regulation, compliance, and system reliability, and also teaches at the University of Alberta at the Law School. From Ardor Energy, we have Sarah Black McNiven, a background in capital markets, law and governance, and spent a decade leading commercial legal work for LNG Canada after progressively senior roles with RBC Capital Markets, McCarthy, Shell, and LNG Canada. At Ardor, Sarah focuses on helping clients turn complex ideas into executional projects with an emphasis on collaboration, innovation, and long-term impact. And Jan Perch, who has more than 2 decades experience in the energy sector, has held various senior roles leading companies, including Shell and PetroChina, focusing on commercial value chains and deal delivery. And at Ardor, Jan leverages this experience to help clients navigate Alberta's evolving power market LNG opportunities, helping you design commercially viable strategies that balance risk, profitability, and decarbonization. And just some background on our two organizations. Alberta Council, we're a legal and lobby firm, and on the call today we have expertise in regulatory processes, government relations, and funding strategies. Together we use these backgrounds to ensure projects are not only economically sound, but also secure the approvals, political support, and incentives needed to succeed. And Ardor Energy, they help clients find and develop viable energy opportunities in Alberta's changing electricity market, as many of you may know that's going on. We'll get into that later today. They use various market intelligence and proprietary analytics to build self-financing roadmaps to help you deliver early value and long-term flexibility in your electricity needs. And just before we begin our kind of presentation here, we just have a little bit of a disclaimer that I'd like to read out, both for Alberta Council and Ardor Energy, that this presentation is intended for informational purposes and should not be construed as any type of financial investment or legal advice. All of our analysis, projections, and data included in this presentation are derived from third-party sources and publicly available information, so you can find these online. And while we took great lengths to make sure the accuracy and reliability of the information presented by both of our organization is accurate, we make no representations or warranties regarding its completeness, accuracy, or suitability towards any particular purpose. This is a very broad group we have here today that we're appreciative of, and we want to make sure that, if we are going to give you advice, we maybe take a deeper look. Ardor Energy and Alberta Council each assumes no liability for any direct, indirect, or consequential loss or damage arising from reliance on any of the information in this document. So thank you very much. And with that, I will pass it off to Moyne to take it away, and look forward to listening to the four speak today.
Thank you, Quinn. My role here is just to set up a bit of an overview of the electricity market in Alberta specifically, but generally in the world as it's evolving today. One of the key features, as many of you know, is that electricity market, the supply has to always equal demand almost instantaneously. There's about a 10-minute window here and there. And the reason for that is that historically there was very little storage capacity, because you cannot store electricity in the amounts that you would need to run a full grid. And so you had to always make sure that you were generating the exact amount that was being consumed. It's not like, if you have a market for apples where, you can grow a lot of apples and then keep them in a warehouse, and then as you need them, you pull them out of the warehouse and sell them in the market. It has to be done 24/7, almost minute by minute. Like I said, there's about a 10-minute window. And so that meant that you couldn't store electricity, and you couldn't throw it away either. So you couldn't overgenerate, and you had to actually generate the right amount. You couldn't overgenerate, you couldn't undergenerate. If you undergenerated, the whole system would crash. If you overgenerated, you would short the system. And so that can cause technical issues. And so the system operators in Alberta, it's called the ISO, AESO, or AESO, is the entity, the government entity, or the regulatory entity that's in charge of making sure the lights stay on. They make sure that supply equals demand. What is happening in the last few years is that we're getting better on the technology side at doing things like storage, and also maybe not taking excess energy, but being able to manage energy that we may not necessarily have a need for at a particular point in time. Next slide. And so the historical picture of what the energy market was, historically, actually, all of this was one company. Generation, transmission, distribution, and retail would be handled by one fully vertically integrated, typically monopolist. And then over the last 30 years or so, starting in the United States in the 90s and here in Alberta also, we started breaking the chain up into little bits and pieces. So power generation, we figured, could become competitive. We could actually have various competitors coming in and generating. So that's the coal, in the old days, coal, natural gas, in Ontario, nuclear. And then with the renewables coming on, we started getting solar and wind and other hydro and others coming in. And then transmission, which is the large voltage, you're taking it from the generators and trying to take it across vast geographic areas. And then distribution is when you start getting into the more urban or consumption sites. That's where you start lowering the voltage and bringing it to the ultimate customer, and that's in the retail side. And so that was notwithstanding that we were in a new world 30 years ago, when we broke it up into that, we started regulating transmission and distribution, kept power generation and retail more or less competitive, with various agencies regulating the middle. We're now seeing new technologies that might upend even this model. Next slide. So battery storage is now becoming a new real player in the sort of the technology space. Until recently, there was very little you could do in terms of storage. You might be able to get a buffer for a few minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour. That's about it. And it really depended on where you located it. And the reason there's a question mark is because battery storage can either be thought of as a generation, it could be thought of as an aid to transmission, it could be thought of as even aid to distribution, or even ultimately the technology gets better and better as something that we do in retail. And so this is one of the new challenges for the regulatory model, and it's a new challenge for all of us, both in the technical space and the regulatory legal space, is where do we place and how do we deal with this new emerging technology? And to complicate that, next slide, we're now getting new sources of consumption. Think of the data centers and all the talk about that. And just a few years before that, it was the cryptocurrency folks. They're generating a lot of, or generating, but also consuming a large amount of energy. And they're very flexible in their location. You and I, we live in our house. We have to be where, in a particular location. So we need the electricity to come to us. But data centers have more flexibility in location. In theory, they could locate right next to the power plant. They could locate right off a major transmission line. They could locate at the distribution center, or they could even locate behind the grid, completely unconnected to the entire world. And that adds other technical and economic and legal dimensions in all of this mix. And so I'll stop there and let Jan take over, and we'll see how this goes technically, and maybe I'll come back at the end and talk about some of the regulatory side.
Great. Well, thank you, Moyne. Good morning, good day, everyone. My name is Sarah Black-McNiven, as Quinn said. And Quinn, I'm going to transition here from what Moyne has shared with us and put it in context for all of us. So we see that overall system in our businesses, in our communities, in our homes. And the genesis for today's presentation is that so many critical aspects of this system, which we've taken for granted and had in quite a stable state for 20 or so years, it's changing. And it's changing in three principal ways, and it's changing now. So some of this change has been bubbling to the surface. And Quinn, if you could go to the next slide, I'd appreciate it. And that change that's bubbling below the surface is coming up. You see it in headlines, perhaps you see it in your responsibilities, chatting with others. And I'd like to walk you through the three areas where we at Ardor see tremendous change. And I'll walk you through those areas. I'm then going to hand it off to my colleague Jan, and he's going to go a little more in detail. But this will set the stage. So we'll take it from the system overview into why now, why are we talking about this now, and into what it means. So why now? The three areas of change are change in the market. We'll come back to that. Change in regulations and changes in technology, which Moyne touched on a little bit. Thinking about the first category, the electricity market itself, in Alberta, we've seen unprecedented number of $0 hours. So when electricity costs $0, that has changed in a structural way. That used to be the odd day here or there. And we're at unseen. I wish I have another chart that if we have a further conversation, I'd love to show you, but a bar graph that really illustrates how that has totally jumped and is here to stay. And not just $0 hours, but real volatility. So the steady state is gone. And with that comes some really expensive times and really inexpensive times, which has people wanting to be in the driver's seat of what costs they're bearing. Part of that is there's been a lot of curtailment in the Alberta grid, principally from renewables. And so that sort of frames some dynamic change that we consider to be structural, not cyclical, in the electricity market itself. The second category of fundamental change is regulatory change, and the folks at Alberta Council are well versed in this as well. That change is happening right now, and it will change. It's sort of been a process in Alberta that's taking about 3 years. When the similar change was done in Ontario, it took about 10 years. Now, there are learnings from that. There's an ability to condense and have synergy from another process. But that change is actually now, and it doesn't give a lot of lead time for people to adjust or get ahead of things. As an example, in 2027, which sounds far away and isn't, we'll have thousands of pricing points in Alberta, whereas today we have one. There's one price. And those thousands of pricing points will affect all generation, and they will affect large industrial loads. So that's new, that's different, and that's coming. And it's something that is really framing how we are helping our clients work through their whole kind of value chain on electricity power and to their industrial purposes or other purposes. Another example of the regulatory change, and this is further out, 2032, so there's a more time to prepare, but the pricing floor, which currently is $0 in the Alberta market, will be negative. So another dynamic to be factored in, and those are illustrative examples, and they're two of many, many points. But I share them with you today to provide kind of tangible examples of what regulatory change means. The third area of change is technology, and that's a really exciting one. As we just heard from Moyne, batteries have come on to be really quite mainstream in a lot of markets. The technology is so robust, and costs have absolutely cratered, allowing that to be deployed in many environments where previously they couldn't be considered. Not just batteries, actually, there are other technologies as well, which we'll touch on. And the neat thing is, because the development has come such a long way, these are TRL, or they're ready to be deployed now. And so it's no longer just sort of a concept that's out there. It's something people can use to take concrete action to manage the dynamics in market pricing and in a shifting regulatory regime. So that's a bit of context on why we care about this now, and why it might be something that you're interested in exploring further in your organization. And with this kind of macro context, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jan. And Jan, I think you're going to start looking at batteries in particular. So Quinn, if you don't mind flipping to the next slide, Jan can take it from here.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And indeed, if there's one technology that really exemplifies just how disruptive a handful of technologies are becoming, then it's battery electric storage systems. On the image here, what we see is a facility in Alberta. This one's developed by a company called Enfinite. They're probably the leading developer here right now in Alberta of such systems. And you see these white containers. And each of these containers is such a battery storage system. These are the Tesla systems that are mostly deployed here. And they are indeed standardized, modular, and therefore highly scalable. These are containers. I like thinking of them as Lego blocks. So you want to build something, you can start with one block and you can put more in. These units are factory manufactured. That drives huge economies of scale as factories expand and big learning curves. The system costs have come down by over 40% in just the last 2 years, which is astonishing, and by over 90% since 2010. And there's really no end in sight. This might sometimes drop faster, sometimes slower, but a lot of scaling effects and new technologies are coming out in here. The annual growth rates we see globally for battery storage systems are similarly astonishing. We put in here the number that's most frequently quoted is over 35%. The last forecast I saw for this year is over 50%. And if you look back over the last 3-5 years, what experts forecast and what actually happened, almost every time, actual growth has far exceeded even the most optimistic forecasts. And this is really driven by the standardization, modularity, but also the multiple benefits that this technology brings. Its resilience, reliability, flexibility, and cost savings. And with falling costs, we see more and more applications. It started off on the grid to stabilize frequencies. As Moyne said, sometimes you need to add a little bit of energy on an almost second by second basis to stabilize things. And it's now evolved. We're seeing large systems that even are targeting 6 and 8 hour durations. So the battery is filling in storage needs for even 6 or 8 hour windows. The standard sizes are still 2 and 4 hours. And we see more and more application in industrial, commercial, and municipal applications. That in turn fuels further growth, that fuels further cost reductions, that fuels further growth again. So this is really I'd say this is highly disruptive for the market in a positive way. If we go to the next slide, please. And just to mention, battery systems are not alone. 2 other classes of technology I'd really like to highlight are, on the one hand, solar, on the other one, power to heat. Now, of course, we'll acknowledge here, especially we're in Alberta, solar is very intermittent, but it has the potential to be really cheap and, of course, clean power intermittently, and it unlocks big opportunities. On the right in the image, what you see, the aerial picture, that's the Shell Scotford refinery just outside of Edmonton. And in the top left corner, you see this gray shaded area. And that's a solar park that Shell co-developed up there, what's called behind the fence. So it's tied directly into the refinery, provides about 20% of their annual power needs, a 58 megawatt solar asset directly tied in. What we see on top is a heat battery, so-called thermal storage system that's at an ethanol plant in California. These heat batteries are the next storage technology that is now taking off. Together with electrode boilers, probably the two most promising power to heat applications. Again, highly modularized, highly scalable, and applying technology in a way that didn't make sense as recently as 5 or 10 years ago, i.e. converting highly valuable power normally back into heat. Engineers never liked that in the past. But if you now have this power, as Sarah pointed out, that is valued at $0 for certain hours, in the future even negative, and it's basically clean and cheap, but only intermittently, here are ways to make use of that intermittently and generate value. If we go to the next slide. So if we take a step back, there's a lot of disruption happening on all these dimensions. What does it really mean for consumers? And we're talking here in particular large industrial clients, commercial clients, and municipalities. It's really all about staying in control. And what we'll see here is that being proactive really pays off. It's all about resilience, keeping the lights on reliably, affordability. There are always only finite dollars and many competing priorities. And then there's the sustainability aspect, which of course involves emissions, greenhouse gas or local, but which is much broader than that. It's really about staying in control and making power procurement in the broadest sense sustainable. Our biggest message here is really that the worst option is just wait and see without any plan. It's really worthwhile even just doing a quick assessment of where you stand, whether you're representing a company or a municipality or a commercial and other commercial enterprise, and make a conscious decision about how you want to address this. If we go to the next slide. Now, what have companies done here already, or municipalities? Let's look at a few case studies. Looking at the top right there, BC Hydro already in 2013 deployed a battery storage system in Field, BC. So if you drive from Lake Louise over to Golden, as you come down the hill there's a small village called Field. And that's at the end of a very long power line that runs up from Golden, BC, that often sees interruptions. And then the community is without power, often for many hours, because the response time can be long. Part of the power line runs along the train lines there, so requires coordination. So they built already in 2013, which was very novel at the time, a battery storage system there. It was a 6 megawatt hour, 1 megawatt system. Worked really well until, unfortunately, in 2021, it burned down. So this facility doesn't exist right now anymore. What is valuable to highlight is that if you were to build the same asset, which back then cost over $13 million, if you build it now, it would be probably 70 to 80% cheaper than back then on an unsubsidized basis, and investment tax credits may also be available. In addition to that, the system would be much more reliable. Technology has improved massively and much safer as well. So the fire risk has massively reduced over the past year. So it's been a lot of improvements in there. We're seeing just below that a First Nation, and the Alberta First Nation, they recently deployed Canada's largest solar project, off-grid solar project. They had diesel-fired power generation in the community there. And that's not replacing those generators, but just it replaces a lot of diesel consumption. So these generators need to run less often, less local air pollution, but importantly also significant energy cost savings from my understanding, because diesel power generation is very expensive. If we look at battery systems again, FortisAlberta, they completed a good 2 years ago a system in Waterton National Park for backup. Again, if you look at the cost curves, A similar system right now would probably cost 30 to 50% less than back then. And that system worked in those cases already. Again, quoting the Shell and Silicon Ranch example, that's for the solar at the refinery in Scotford. Little Potato Company, they have a new packaging facility in Alberta that deploys solar rooftop there for cost savings. And then McCain currently is developing a solar and wind project that also has some power to heat near Lethbridge. That's currently going through the regulatory process with a few hiccups, so it'll be interesting to see where it ends up. But otherwise, a very ambitious and very interesting project. If we go to the next slide, yeah, hypothetical application. We have seen on the list today quite a few representatives from municipalities. We talked about resilience here. So this image here is AI at work. So this is not an actual community, but we wanted to throw hypothetically, how could you deploy something? And what do we mean by scalability and modularity? If you're at the end of the line somewhere, similar to what Field BC is and was facing, local storage may make sense, even if just as a resilience measure in case of weather events. So in the foreground, we see some battery storage systems. You can start very small. Even a single battery pack, there are so-called AC packs that are easier to tie in, can already deliver a lot of resilience for you. You can combine it with solar, for example, on your facility, which in many cases will pay for itself just through energy cost savings, but also in turn increases resiliency again. And with the market restructuring, without going too deep down that rabbit hole, there are likely new ways to monetize storage assets as well, even for distribution connected assets through some of the flexibility products that are coming out there. So there are ways to deploy these technologies in, we'll call it self-financing pathways, but essentially in ways that shouldn't be a drain on your finances, but which, if sized correctly and staged correctly, will be actually economically efficient as well. So with that, what's the playbook? Our main pitch is keep it as simple as possible. And that means focusing on the feasibility stage early on. Before you go too far down a rabbit hole or start developing something, really take the time to define the status quo. This is simple, but often forgotten. Status quo just means how much energy do you currently consume? Gas, electricity. How seasonal is that? How many swings do you have intraday? Do you have challenges with reliability, for example? Then map the value drivers. Is it for your company or for your community? Is it more about cost savings? Is it about reliability and resilience? Is it about emissions? And what are the constraints? Most often that's focused around the financial side. And then we recommend screening broadly first. So don't just pick one solution that looks promising at that stage, like solar, and get quotes, but screen broadly. What is it really that could work? Is it storage? Is it generation? Is it just a renegotiation of your current contract with your retailer? Is it a swap of retailers? And just look broadly top down in there to see where the biggest opportunity seems to sit. And that then leads to developing deployment roadmaps. That's where funding options come in, regulatory requirements, and then the engineering, procurement, and construction aspects. These are steps that are very straightforward, the first steps. That's where we're putting a lot of our focus. And one thing I'll just mention here, within an hour or two, you can usually quickly figure out whether this makes sense for you or not. And we'd be happy to assist there. There is no clock starting ticking there. So if you just want to explore something, please don't hesitate to reach out. That initial screening, whether something might be in it for you, can be established very quickly with very little formal work in there. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Alberta Council for more on the regulatory and funding option side.
Okay, well, I'll just provide a very brief overview of some of the agencies that you may need to navigate There's the umbrella department is the Department of Energy, but of course you're also interacting with the environment and you're interacting with all sorts of other departments. But so just to drill down on one particular one, within the Department of Energy, there's a bunch of agencies that are independent, standalone, and have their own mandate. One of them being the Alberta Utilities Commission. And the Alberta Utilities Commission, in addition to regulating the rates, the actual prices that retail customers have to pay via the transmission and distribution, also regulates the physical aspects of generation and also regulates some aspects of retail. And so depending on where the batteries or data centers are located in that chain or link, they're going to come under at some point the auspices of the Alberta Utilities Commission. If you're putting something into the grid or taking something off the grid, you are going to get involved at some point with the Alberta Utilities Commission. Next slide. You're also going to get involved with the ISO, which is the Alberta Electric System Operator. And they're the folks who keep the lights on, if you want to think of them in a very simplistic manner. They're the ones who make sure that electricity generated anywhere in the province gets to a customer at any other side of the province. And for that, they have two aspects or two scopes of regulation. One is the technical stuff. And the technical side deals with everything from frequencies, how much electricity is coming on, how much electricity is coming off, all the stuff that Jan talked about with battery storage, data centers, just a plain vanilla gas-fired plant. Everything has to be coordinated on this massive grid, and you should appreciate a huge technical endeavor, and hats off to them for that. There's also market rules, because our system of matching customers with generators from start to finish relies on a market this bidding system that the ISO administers, and so there are market rules that come with that, and so there are technical market rules and there are technical rules, if you want to think of that dichotomy. Now, these rules can also be challenged in front of the Alberta Utilities Commission, so it all comes back there. If you don't like one of those rules or you don't like the way the ISO is treating you, you have some option of appealing internally in this sort of system. Next slide. And there's also, you should know, another sort of player on the side, a very important player that doesn't get much press, but is sitting there lurking, and they're the Market Surveillance Administrator. And there, if you want to think of the analogy in the criminal world, would be the police or the prosecutor or a bit of both. They make sure that everybody's playing by the rules. The ISO has enough on its plate in terms of technical regulation. They have to make sure lights are staying on and the market is working. And so they don't want to be involved in the actual policing, making sure people are complying. Any violations of the rules end up going to the MSA, and the MSA investigates. And then if they decide there's an infraction, can fine you, find the offending party, or prosecute. And if there's an actual hearing, the hearing actually goes in front of the AUC. And so, next slide. The process of having one of these hearings, if you're thinking of setting up a battery storage unit to be into the grid, or maybe you're setting up one of these crypto farms or even a data center that's going to take things off the grid, you probably have to go through a hearing process at the AUC. Very simplistically, it's you apply, you call somebody up there, they'll tell you what to do, you file your notice. There's a bunch of paperwork you have to do. I say paperwork, but it could be, binders and binders of documents, including technical documents that you'll have to file. The staff there are very helpful. So if you do have concerns, you can always call them or call somebody who does this for a living. And there's a process. There's usually application. There's what we call a pre-hearing stage. All the documents are collected. And then if there are parties that have an issue or concern about this new battery site or data storage or any other regular generator or anybody else coming in, there'll be some notice that they're also going to get involved in the hearing, and then the parties will exchange information. So there's a discovery stage where everybody's exchanging information, and then if need be, usually not, but if need be, there will be an actual hearing. It could be oral, it could be in writing, and then a decision is issued by the Alberta Utilities Commission. Next slide. And what you should keep in mind is that when they're making their decision, the private party, the one that's trying to come on the grid, either as someone who's putting something on or taking something out, are only one bit of this process. There may be other parties that object. It could be landowners, it could be homeowners, it could be farmers, it could be anybody who's affected by this location. It could be other customers, or it could be other generators, so they can come in. And then the commission has to take into account the public interest at large, notwithstanding that there are lots of parties in the room. There may be parties who are unrepresented. And so that all comes under the umbrella of the Alberta Utilities Commission when making a decision. I just provide that as an overview so that you also keep in mind the regulatory space. It's not just about you, but there's a sort of a larger context in these typical hearings. These hearings can take a month if it's all done in writing and it's not nothing too earth-shattering, but they can also take at least a year or so if they are on a larger scale. And I think that's my set of slides, and maybe over to Clay.
Thank you, Moyen. It's an interesting intersection that we're discussing today, because if the energy generation, distribution, storage environment is going through a massive structural change, so too are the funding markets and the funding opportunities for these types of projects. And we have seen in recent years a dramatic increase in requests from clients for support in everything from multi-residential, suburban area, community-based energy generations and storage projects to neighborhood-based. We're currently working on a project with one of the community leagues here at Edmonton to turn one of the community halls into a resilience hub, so that during potential weather-related events that drain the system, seniors or people who cannot afford air conditioning, for instance, in the neighborhoods will have a place to go and be safe, and in a cooled, lighted, supplied environment, all the way down to building level. Adding storage units, adding battery storage units to ag centers or arenas, for instance. So we have seen a dramatic increase in the last year around these types of project requests. The interesting thing, too, from my side is many of the principles that we've heard throughout this presentation apply to what we're now seeing in the new funding environment as well. So really the three keys that I would kind of iterate at this point would be, when thinking about working or applying or assessing what your future needs might be in this area, is to really look at project design opportunities. Earlier, we talked about the markets and technology regulations, resilience, affordability, sustainability, modularity, scalability, and self-finance. What you see, there are multiple ways to put a project together. And I've just given you two examples. If you take a technology plus resilience plus modularity type of project, you can get into something as small as adding a battery storage component to an arena or a recreation complex, or as I was saying earlier, the case of a community hall, just making sure you have the battery storage that people have a safe place to go during a climate event. And climate-related events linking with energy storage right now are very familiar types of projects for us. Similarly, if you wanted to put together a project that looked at markets, affordability, and self-financing, you're thinking business cases, you're thinking feasibility studies. All of these are fundable through various platforms that we have access to now in the funding world. Secondly, is we're really emphasizing, we do this with all of our projects, is collaboration. So if you're a municipal client, you can partner with an ag society for a solar installation. If you're a municipal client, you can partner with a school board or a small nonprofit or another business for a storage project. Again, this is all scalable, but what we're trying to emphasize is really optimizing your revenue pathways. As I was saying earlier, the structural changes in the funding environment are deep and being heavily felt at this moment. In other words, fewer dollars available, far, far more competition available, and a really substantive and significant change in the way that projects are being scoped, assessed, reviewed, and funded. So it's a new world in many ways as we move forward here. So having as many collaborators at the table, even for small tranches of money, allows every member of that community, or every member of that, or every collaborator in that project to optimize revenue pathways. And that's really what we're emphasizing now, is that we can't, the large asks, the $20 million asks, we still make them, they're still there. But people tend to ignore the smaller, the $500,000, the $250,000, $100,000 asks, which really reinforce what Jan was talking about vis-a-vis the modularity of these kinds of projects. There's no need to go for the big $20 million hit first. If you can break or scope out or parse your community project needs into smaller applications, we can really start to address those effectively, give you some wins, give you some data to collect and use for subsequent applications. So again, you look at your project design component, look at really how you envision and scope a project, work in smaller tranches of money, perhaps build up over time instead of going for the big hit all at once. And really to underscore, Jan was saying earlier that one of the most dangerous positions, most vulnerable positions is the wait and see. We iterate that as well all the time now in the funding world. We're looking regularly, commonly at 6-month delays between application and decision, which is really between application and release of funds, up to 18 months of delays. So being proactive, getting project scoped early, getting collaborations in place early, getting applications in, years in advance of when the project lands. If you think about it, if you have an 18-month lead time or a 10-month lead time, you often on the back end of that have an 18-month window to project completion. So if you could be looking at 28 months from the application submission through the decision process, through the deadline to complete the project. So we're talking over 2 years from beginning to end now in many of these processes. So we're always strong advocates of getting your application in place, getting your project scope, getting feedback early, moving into the process, moving into the pipeline as quickly as possible within the realm of your decision-making and your capacity to deliver on the project. So really, again, we're looking at the project design, the collaboration opportunities, and the lead time pressures that we're really feeling right now. The lead time pressures also mean that the scoping of the project is really, really crucial. We've run into situations where, you price a project or you budget a project early, you're waiting 12 months for a decision. By the end of that 12 months, your project's increased by 25 to 30%, and you're already, backwards in terms of the funding that you need. So being aggressive, being strategic, being proactive are all very much at the forefront of what we're suggesting now in and around these kind of projects. I'd also just like to iterate, parsing out your project, thinking of it in stages and phases, understanding that modularity piece or embracing that modularity piece, really key to ensuring that the cash flow into your projects is sustainable and regular. You're not moving from a big chunk of money to a big chunk of money necessarily. You're moving through small tranches of money spaced regularly throughout the project. So that's my contribution, as optimistic as it might be, and I'll be hanging around as well to answer any questions that might arise.
Well, thanks, Clay. And I think I'll leave it to Jan, I think, here at the end to close this out.
Yeah, just going to say many thanks again for the opportunity to present here and looking forward to addressing questions now. The good news is what I would like to leave with is the first few steps are not rocket science, and it's something where, Alberta Council and us, we're very keen to help and just help to lay the land and create these maps there. So really keen now to dive into the question, but thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you to all our speakers today. I, as an energy policy guy, obviously very interested in these topics, and I was privileged to attend one of Ardor Energy's training sessions there last week, and spent a whole day going over some of the energy market restructuring, getting into some of the technical details, and then going over some of the policy issues and concerns that may be coming up for many of the people on the call today. Looking forward to 2027 when a lot of these structures and regulations and changes are being made. It's very exciting, and shamelessly I'll plug an article I wrote and published just yesterday with Alberta Council's newsletter. If you'd like to maybe get a good understanding of where things are headed, I'd certainly encourage you to take a read or reach out to Ardor Energy. Even as somebody who's been in the space a little bit, it's complicated and goes above my head some days. So certainly good to look in. I see that Clay already answered a question from Karina. Glad we addressed that in the presentation. Robert Tremblay has a question of how important is negative pricing and LMP in the restructured electricity market for the deployment of potential ETES? And so maybe Jan, you can take that one on for us.
Good, yeah. Thanks, Robert. And so briefly, ETS, that's the electrothermal energy storage. That's a solution where you take electricity, you convert it into heat, so it's like a giant toaster essentially, on an industrial scale. You store it and you release it as heat, for example, for steam generation or other process heat for industry usually. Now, as Sarah mentioned, we will get negative pricing in Alberta. So currently, wholesale, the traded electricity price can't go below $0 per megawatt hour. And that will drop to minus $100 a megawatt hour from 2032. Many other markets in Europe, in the US, and Texas already have negative pricing. We will get the same. So what that just means is you get literally paid to take electricity. So the more you consume, the more money you make. So obviously for anyone who has flexible load, who can flexibly access this, bypass the hours where prices are high, but use power during the hours when prices are either zero, like right now, or even negative, this is highly valuable. LMPs, the locational marginal pricing. Also, as Sarah mentioned, we have currently one single price, the ASO price for power in Alberta. We'll have thousands of pricing points going forward. Many will trade at the same price, but many will also have different prices depending on congestion. So in short, any load that is flexible will be able to make use of it. And the electrothermal energy storage is one of those examples that is highly flexible. So you can turn it on whenever power prices are low. It's often referred to as a bottom feeder in the price in the market. And what it also avoids is curtailment. So last quarter in Q2 in Alberta, we had 310,000 megawatt hours of electricity that simply couldn't be absorbed into the grid, almost all renewable. So that was wasted effectively. So with a solution like thermal storage, you can absorb this. With LMP and negative pricing, you can even get paid for doing it. And it's just another way to use these tools intelligently in an economically advantageous way to create more resilient grids and more competitive industry. So in short, both are really important. And I think these are going to be big factors to help with driving deployment. And I'll just very briefly mention, I saw Karina's question. It's such a great question. For communities, it's worth looking a little bit in the details. What's causing brownouts? Also run brownouts in a municipality. Is it a single feeder line that may have issues? Is it the broader distribution network? Can you put storage at a central point to alleviate it, or is it more decentralized? But that's something, again, we could look at, and I think very quickly you can form an opinion on, okay, is it worth looking at in more details or not? So please feel free to reach out there. So it would be a great one to discuss.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in briefly and say, the LMP model that's coming in now is a huge improvement over what we used to call the postage stamp approach. So you one price, and regardless of where you were in the province. And even though officially that was the policy, the ISO tried to incentivize locations by using land loss rules. And I know a little bit about this because I was involved in a very long saga as a commissioner, which ultimately ended up at the Court of Appeal a few times. And so you just by telling you that, you should appreciate that it was a very complex and complicated way that we were trying to incentivize location in the old system. And so this new system of locational and marginal pricing is meant to get the generation or battery storage to go where the need is the most, which might include the northern parts where the brownouts are going out, and to stay away from areas which are already congested and you don't need them so that you don't have curtailment. So it's meant to distribute the load and but more importantly, the generation, which includes the battery storage. Or if you were thinking about curtailment, maybe data centers that could take some energy off the grid and not generate internally. That's what this new LMP regime is meant to do.
Yeah, and Jan, in kind of our conversations at your session there last week, and kind of your presentation here today, you talk about scalability and kind of those Lego blocks, and Clay talked about, we can start small and build big. Maybe you can share with us kind of maybe if you got more details of about that scalability, what does that look like, and maybe what the costs and timelines are for implementation? Because we've got that 6 to 18 months for potential funding, grant opportunities. We know the restructured electricity market is coming in about 2 years from now. So, looking at these kind of things are really important right now. What does that kind of look like in terms of scalability, cost, and timeline for implementation?
And just briefly, cost estimate on the particular technologies, or yeah.
Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
if you've got some numbers off the top of your head.
Yeah. So scalability, of course, in theory, you can scale any technology. The interesting part about the technologies we talked about here is that each one of these blocks, so I like the Lego analogs. My kids love, we've got so much Lego in the house, but it's in a way similar, where with each block you can do something. If you got a few blocks, you can build something small. If you got a lot more, you can build something more elaborate. But you can do something with each block. Where I'll take a step back. Most of my career, I was on large LNG projects, really fantastic opportunities, great projects. But they're immensely complex because if one of your blocks is missing, your asset doesn't work. The great thing here is that you can deploy each one of these blocks, like a single battery block by itself can deliver a lot of value already. And often small systems have higher rates of returns even than very big ones because of the way you can stage the consumption. So I would say, what's the minimum size is a question we get often. Like, at what size does it start to make sense? The answer is always, it depends, but it can be in a very low range. Feasibility can be quite inexpensive. Clay outlined as well, there's good funding available with lower amounts. So with a few $100,000, you can do a lot. And you might even be able to deploy something really small already. A battery system, you're talking low single million-dollar digit. So you're probably from something that really makes a big difference. You're probably starting around the 2 million Canadian dollar marks, and then it goes up from there. But you can then almost do it in these steps without having to go through huge steps. And that first deployment can inform you a lot on what you do in your next stage, and then you can scale it up, and you tend to get synergies. Another scale that I would just throw out there, like for solar, obviously, the larger you go, the more economies of scale you get. But at the same time, on the regulatory side, small systems can often be much simpler to also get approved and set up. There's a 5 megawatt threshold here in Alberta. So if you're below 5 megawatt per meter, your permitting process is a lot simpler. And that may advance timelines and may keep overall cost quite low. And again, you can learn from that, and later on you can upscale it. So there are many different ways you can, so to say, skin the cat. The absolute core is this first, what I listed as steps 1 and 2. What is your status quo? What are your value drivers, and what are your constraints? And that is, I'll just stress it again, that's really straightforward, often forgotten, but is the most important step in the whole picture, because that then informs how you scope, how you scan, and what can make sense for you and what options are available.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed some of our discussions around, with all these new technical aspects coming into the restructured electricity market, there's new products and opportunities for these kind of technologies to be used. And, we're talking about, do an assessment, because if you stay at the status quo and just let issues come to you, you might be left out in the cold, or you're going to be a couple years behind taking advantage of some of these opportunities that are coming out with, like you say, kind of being flexible with the load you put on the grid, and being able to put power back in if that's something that those projects look at. And with the negative pricing, there's a lot going on. And so I've found a lot of value in learning from you just about the process, but certainly for our people on the call, whether that's industry or municipalities or other organizations, you know, even just getting a better understanding of what's coming down in terms of your energy costs, your electricity costs, I think people would find a lot of value in. And we're kind of coming up on time, so maybe I'll leave it there. I don't see any more questions in the chat. Maybe if anybody has any final questions, we can address something. But certainly appreciate everybody coming on today and spending your lunch hour with us. On behalf of Alberta Council and Ardor Energy, we certainly appreciate your time and participating with us and your questions. And Aaron has posted our emails and contact information in the chat. Should you like to have a discussion with any of us on maybe bringing some of these projects to your communities and getting the technical expertise from Jan and Sarah, or when you decide to go forward, kind of getting some help dealing with regulatory bodies and government and funding opportunities from Alberta Council, we can certainly bring our expertise to support that. So I'm not seeing any more questions. Happy Thanksgiving. Yes, thanks. You as well. I hope everybody has a good long weekend with their families and a good rest of your week. Thank you so much, everyone.
Well, thank you so much as well. Thanks, Quinn. Thanks to the whole Alberta Council team. Really great working with you guys together. And yeah, looking forward to any questions that may come or opportunities to explore. Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving.